It's not my, no favorites here. Just to give a very, very short, in a nutshell, description of what you do. So I'll go to Adriana first, then Herman, then Rob. Adriana, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Adriana. I work at the Metcalf Foundation, which is a private foundation that acts as a funder, and we support a lot of different organizations, including at times many things that are happening in the West neighborhood catchment. And I work with organizations in helping them strengthen their ideas and their strategies and build out their vision for the work of things that improve the lives of low-income people around issues around work and working poverty in the city of Toronto.
Thanks, Adriana. Herman.
Thank you. So I'm officially the executive director of Scadding and been acting in that capacity for a couple of years now. But I've been with this organization for a really, really, really long time. It's more than 30 years now. So I've been doing every aspect of community work in this community since I was 14 years old. And I was mentored by staff at West Neighbourhood House and fell in love with community services as a result of that. So the community center services, preschool all the way up to seniors and everything in between. It's a really, really dynamic place that's sort of built on the idea of innovation. So you might have heard of some of the crazy things that we've been doing for the last 20 years in partnership with TNC and Metcalf, of course, and with West Neighbourhood House. So yeah, it's that's what I do in a nutshell.
Excellent. Thanks, Herman. And Rob, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rob Howarth, and this network I work for is called the Toronto Neighbourhood Centres, and Scadding Court and West Neighbourhood House are two of 25 members of agencies across the city of Toronto, multi-service, nonprofit organizations. They all look a little different, but they're all committed to place-based capacity building, anti-poverty work in their communities. And I actually started my career in the nonprofit sector at West Neighbourhood House, then called St. Christopher House in the youth programs 35 years ago now. So anyway, my roots go back to that organization.
Excellent. Lots of tight connections in this sector, I think. Great. So I'm going to pose some questions now to all three of you. I do want to note that if our members have questions, which no doubt they will, please drop them in the chat, and so we'll be able to get to them after we do this sort of go around. So I want to ask, and I'm going to ask Adriana first, and then Herman, and then Rob. What are some of the largest changes that you've seen in the past 5 to 10 years in this community, either as a community member, as I know you all live within, at least within shouting distance of the catchment area, but also in the work that you're doing. So Adriana, I'll go to you first.
Sure. So I think I bring two hats to that. So one, I'm a resident of Brockton Village for the last 12 years. So I live at just around Dundas and Dufferin. And I would say there's three major significant changes that I've seen. And part of what it reminds me when I talk to my neighbors is these are some of the trends that they've seen over waves of time, and it comes out in different ways. And so the first one that's the most explicit to me is the gentrification of the neighborhood, the level of affordability, across the board, rents, houses, real estate, commercial, small business, across the board, the affordability of the neighborhood. And I see that from small businesses to people looking for apartments, the cost of basement apartment studios. So definitely that aspect is a significant change in the neighborhood. The second one I would say is the opioid crisis, and watching the opioid crisis that has been we're still a fairly downtown neighborhood as the city has gotten bigger, but the opioid crisis that has sometimes tended to be situated more in the more immediate downtown east is shifting westward. And I think that while some of my old neighbors have more reflections on impacts that other crises have had in the neighborhood over the years. This is, I think, fairly new for a lot of new home residents, as mentioned to the other one. So I think that creates a lot of neighborhood change. And along with that, I would say the third one is the aging in place in seniors. One of the things that is so incredible about, I think, the West Downtown neighborhood is that there are so many seniors that age in place, and there is that ability to stay in your home. And I see, you know, the West bus that comes along and picks up the seniors over the many, many years on my street and take them to programming. So as all of us become older, but especially a certain demographic really shift the aging in place, what are the impacts that have? And then also with the other two crises, the affordability of that. And so I think, especially communities like ours that have still strong pockets of relative kind of rental, how do we protect them? How do we strengthen relationships with Toronto Community Housing Partnerships? Because I'm very concerned about where workers can afford to live in this city.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Adriana. I'm in Little Italy and I'm surrounded by nonnas all around. So I'm with you about the aging in place. That's interesting. Herman, what are some changes that you've seen here in the last 5 to 10?
I think I agree with a lot of what Adriana had said, and you know, my comments are similar in that the seniors and aging in place and some of the needs that we are identifying, I guess sort of magnified by the pandemic for sure, but in a very quick time, you know, the seniors that we were, the numbers of seniors that we were supporting went from 50 to 150 overnight, and that was concerning, and that will remain a concern for the next little while. I was surprised when I was asked to do some frontline work and was volunteering just towards the end of last year over the holiday, and ended up at homes of individuals that we service regularly that wouldn't necessarily need a bag of food or a children's gift during the holiday because of their living situation, and that they were obviously affluent or rich or could afford to do that. And it's not to take away from our work and loving everybody that comes in the building and caring for everyone that comes in and making sure that everybody belongs here. But I think that the gentrification that's being talked about that's coming is sort of is upon us, and it's all sort of mixed up right now. We were caught without having 100% addressing that reality and how services like ours need to transition to ensure that the resources that we work really, really hard for get into the right hands at the right time. So I think that was another thing that sort of changed. It's just like it's no longer 80%, 90% of the folks that are in the buildings taking care of working with us actually need the service in a really bad way. So what do we do for some things like that? And just in terms of the work that we're doing with youth and what we've noticed, again, pandemic has magnified that. It's like, where did they go, you know, and what are they doing, and how do we ensure that they're also taken care of during this time, and how do we make sure that in the future we're not asking, I'm not asking, it's very sort of this neighborhood focus where these young people are and what they're up to. They come to play basketball and share these resources, use the weight room. They don't necessarily do some of the social and educational programs that we do, but they're part of this community in a very vulnerable, very needy part of the community. So when they just disappeared and we weren't able to get them supports, gift cards, food, them with their young families, all of that sort of stuff, it was painful for me. So that's also a change in that. I think centers like ours have allowed the need to not be intrusive and not document as much, because that was a barrier to participation. but as a result, we've actually created a situation where we're not in touch when we need to be in touch the most.
That's interesting. So some of these, the past year has sort of exposed needs that were deeper and more, more hidden maybe than they had been, and also some things about the way that you folks provide service. That's really interesting. Thank you, Rob. Largest changes you've seen in the past 5 or 10 years in this community?
I'm just going to add a perspective around changes to social policy, or the reaction of government public policy to this space. I mean, I think we know that there's changes like in the labor market with the gig economy and stuff like that, that we often feel like government's racing to try to keep up with that reality and make changes that would, but in the housing market, I just want to mention in particular, it's not so much a failure, it's more an active stoking of the loss of affordable housing with very specific policies. Right now, over the last 10 years, we've had housing turn into something called an asset class. It's been financialized in a way where the way money comes from Canadian Mortgage and Housing Association to developers incentivizes them to build certain things. The way investments happen now through these retirement investment trusts, and the fact that the return on that investment is not taxed at all, it's tax-free. Those social policies, they're not only, it's not just a failure of not building affordable housing anymore. It's actually creating a context where we're losing more units in the West communities every year than we can possibly build. And we've got, it's almost like social policy, not only is it not helping us, it's actively working against the interests of having a more inclusive neighborhood. So I think we need to pay attention to those dynamics as well.
That's incredibly useful. A lot of folks, when they were examining issues in our discussions yesterday, housing came up quite a lot, and so I think that in terms of policies that are creating those changes trickling down will inform their discussions on that today. I want to ask you all just briefly, and I know I'm asking an impossible question here, or not entirely impossible, but I'm wondering what changes you think are coming down the pipeline in the next 5 to 10 years. And I'll start there with Herman, and then ask Rob, and then Adriana. Herman.
In this neighborhood, it's going to be the revitalization of Alexandra Park and the Atkinson Co-op, actually, and I think it's 2,200 new units of market housing that's coming in there, and so that's going to change the dynamic around here tremendously in terms of preparing for that reality and making sure that our assets remain sound for people that are living low income, disadvantaged, that need operations like ours to continue to survive and provide affordable services. So that is a bit of a bit of something that we worry about and that we're trying to understand. And I know that everything that we're doing right now is about that reality in terms of the work that's happening in Atkinson with Toronto Neighbourhood, with TCH and making sure that they have social policies that address that right away, so the community towards that reality. The need for ensuring that money now and for young people, I think that needs to continue to be something we focus on. And Scadding Court that does we have a lot of entrepreneurship opportunities and for women and newcomers, and we've been doing that for a number of years. But there's a need to make sure that young people have an opportunity to become entrepreneurs and figure out ways to get money into their pockets. Now, a lot of the services that we've provided for young people go beyond just employment, in that a lot of the young people will not last 2-3 weeks in a job because they just don't have the skills, but they need the money. So how do we ensure that once the training starts that they have the money and sort of on the same parallel to doing training while they make some money, so that when they are actually ready to go out, they're polished and ready to have meaningful long-term employment in some of those in some identified areas that's in partnership with us. So making sure that some of that stuff happens and is addressed, and that we're not surprised by any of it is going to be key over the next 3 years for sure.
Thanks, Herman. Yeah, those empowering programs that you've got at Scadding Court are well known in the sector. Rob, next 5 to 10.
Next 5 to 10, you know, I don't think it looks pretty, but because I see the systems that we've, you know, stuff we've seen over the last 30 years, deepening poverty, inequality, sustained racism. A couple of things I just note: the affordability pressures that are pressing and displacing people around affordability of housing. Same is going to apply to affordability of community program space. So there's a whole bunch of supports that people rely on, and little groups that are, you know, offering things out of faith community spaces for free right now that are going to be redeveloped. We're going to lose space for that programming to happen. And I'd say the biggest challenge for an organization like West over the next while is what I would refer to as the continued food bankization, which isn't a very good word, but of the social service sector. And that's where I feel like, you know, our sector's always been nimble and creative in terms of looking at policy failures or spaces that aren't being attended to by government and trying to create a response. But the end goal is actually to get some sort of more public response, robust response into that space. And we've seen with food banks that in fact isn't happening. So the latest example was through the pandemic, where the federal government gave hundreds of millions of dollars to food banks as a strategy to deal with food security, when the issue is people's incomes. And so if social policy isn't going to actually attack the root cause of inequality and racism, then these community agencies, I think, are going to be very torn between the pressures that Herman's mentioned about the immediate needs and responding to those. And then at the same time, a lack of public policy response that gets to the root of things. So organizations will be picking up the pieces, and in some ways will be a philanthropic response rather than a public policy response. And we'll be kind of keeping a lid on things, on the fact that things are going off the rails, not just with food banks, but with all of our services. So I'll stop there.
So it's band-aids at the end of the chain of what causes these effects, rather than getting to the root causes. Thank you, Rob. Adriana.
Yeah, you know, I think when I think about the next 5 or 10 years, I'll focus on a little bit on like the vantage point that I hold. I mean, across, I'd say significantly, funding constraints are going to change. There's across the board, different levels of government are now trying to figure out what their income revenue, their economy, how they're going to pay for things, what choices they want to make. And I think that's what this is really about. It's about choices. You know, it's like, what are we investing in, and what are we, I always have heard, and I really agree. It's not that we don't know what works or what we can do to solve poverty and address these issues. So it's not about not knowing the answer. It's about not having the political will. And I think that that's a really important thing. So what I see in the next 3 to 5 years coming up is a lot of funding constraints. One of the ways that government funding is identified and allocated is based on demographics. And so as the neighborhood demographics change, that changes sometimes the way government funding envelopes happen. And I remember that was significant to the sector of supporting newcomer and immigrants when they arrived, when about 10 years ago, they changed the arrival system of how it was counted. And so that brought less, even though newcomers came to Toronto, that wasn't necessarily always their first point of arrival. And so how you get funded based on demographics is going to be a key challenge, I think, for mixed neighborhoods, because sometimes those challenges don't come out through the demographics. I think also there's like a new generation of funders out there. And so part of that is, how do we support the work that's going to be done when there might be funding constraints from government, and some of the more traditional ways in which organizations have gotten funding, whether that's United Way or some larger funding envelopes, and trying to woo individual funding donors that might have very distinct preferences, and yet still this idea that we're trying to strengthen and support a strong social safety net with dignity and with human rights and with mutual respect, I think is really important. And what I hope we'll see is more of these kind of grassroots mutual aid things that have popped up that really show what makes communities so strong to begin with. And we see that in the neighborhoods that we live in, and especially this one. It's such a strong, supportive social capital and civil society neighborhood. But I think that will be a key thing. I think we'll see organizations respond with trying to figure out how to do like collaborations or organizational mergers. There's going to be a lot of pressure on them on this, what I would say, this professionalization, which I don't like the word because I feel it's like a corporatization of the not-for-profit sector, as they're trying to, just like business is trying to be more social. I think there's this pressure to make social more business in this way of somehow being a little bit more transactional, when I really believe what makes change happen is relationships. And so it's the relationships that we have to preserve. How do we preserve organizations' relationships with communities, with residents, support residents' relationships with each other, and have these organizations be part of their neighborhoods? But I think there's going to be pressure to get bigger, just to make things more affordable. So organizational, nonprofit organization collaboration and mergers. And then finally, I think the government is going to be trying to push out a lot of, like, we want innovation and we want new solutions, and trying to look for the new. And I think the challenge here is that we have to go and think about, what do we know from our years of experience that works? And sometimes also be critical of, what are the things we've been doing for years that haven't hit the spot? And so it's not just doing more of the same, because I would say some of the same is good and some of the same has been sometimes mediocre in impact. And so I think the real push for all organizations, the not-for-profit sector, is like, how do we focus on systemic issues? How do we find our organizational power and insight and experience of what we know? How do we do the long game and work on really kind of policy issues that build on our strengths and have impact, and bring a critical voice, which I really feel needs to be continued, of civil society, of people on the impact that government has on these choices in our community, but also people bringing their wisdom into what's working and what's not working and why. The long game, focus on root issues, push back on government, but know that there is going to be a desire to kind of cut things in the air. And in typical ways, when there's been constraints, I worry about them pitting social needs against social needs and community good against community good, when it's about growing the pie and refocusing the priorities.
Nice, thank you, Adriana. That's sort of actually, you've created a segue into my next question, which is about what would you advise in terms of proactive measures or different approaches? And you sort of talked a little bit about your thoughts on that when it comes to how community service organizations like West, are in the community. So I want to ask Herman. And then Rob, and then I'll circle back to Adriana to see if you want to add anything to what you just talked about here about. So Herman, some things that you'd advise organizations like West to think about when it comes to getting ahead of some of these challenges or changing their role in the community.
I think when I start to think about this, I remember feeling that the West Neighborhood House actually has a great responsibility to continue to be a proactive, wonderful organization that's always sort of doing things innovatively and doing things big, and providing like a really positive role model for other organizations like theirs in the city of Toronto. And I'm talking since I was, came to Canada in '76. West Neighborhood House has been that type of influence on this neighborhood, and this catchment. The thing that's really scary for me is that in the neighborhood that I'm in right now, there's there's a significant chance that the history here will be erased and would be gone forever. And I know that I'm working with the Alexandra Park Community Center and some of the alumni of West Neighborhood House, formerly St. Christopher House, to do whatever we can to talk about and discuss and document that history so that it's not in danger of being gone forever. And because we think that it's important that the generations to come could look back and see you know, the effect of good community programming and what that can do, what it can produce in neighborhoods like ours, and how it can save neighborhoods and save lives. So I want to make sure that that's the biggest message for me in terms of the future for West Neighborhood House, is that we all work together to make sure that this history here isn't erased as we go ahead and take care of the future of other neighborhoods and other demographics and all of that sort of stuff. I think we also need to be super brave in that we need to ensure that the next decades or 2 decades is that we're actually focusing in on the Black experience in terms of the work that we do, to make sure that we're not surprised that services and policies and all of that sort of stuff don't necessarily address or focus in on some of the challenges that the Black community has faced and continues to face. And I think part of my experience here and having to understand that you need to be brave to make statements like that and to address and take a look at your policy. So it's what I'm going to be doing. I'm not protected because I'm a Black individual. I think I'm part of the system that has not necessarily provided the best opportunities for Black individuals in these neighborhoods. So we need to take a look at that. We need to be super, super brave about it, and making sure that we continue to provide that opportunity for individuals to become employed and gainfully employed in some of the other mechanisms, like starting their own business, small business, and all of that. I think it's super important in that, you know, the small business is you know, a really big part of the economic engine of Canada. And if they're owned by small families and medium-sized businesses, sort of controlled and nepotism, all of that sort of stuff, the groups that are coming to our neighborhoods, they're not going to be able to finish a training opportunity and go and get a job in those places. They're going to be they're going to have to work 3 times, 4 times as hard. So let's try to make sure that we're providing opportunities for people to start their own business and to become a part of that really successful economic part of the country, and give them the tools and skills that they need to make those types of decisions for their families moving forward. Rosemary Freeze?
I think
Looks that way.
Looks like
I'll just carry on.
Yeah, if you can just carry on, Rob.
Yes.
Rosemary should be back shortly.
Okay. I'm just going to build off of what Herman, you know, started the seed of in terms of the entrepreneurial and employment stuff. I'd say that there's 2 things that West and partners have to build on, or things that we should focus on over the next while. The first would be recentering the community as the actor, as the center of change. And so seeing West and other organizations as agencies that are orienting their work in a way that responds to the community as the actor and supports the community to be the actor. And I think this connects with some of what Adriana was talking about in terms of the issues around political stuff and political will and building that agency. And then I think the second thing is to think beyond a service response. I think I just talk for my sector and social services, tended to feel like we're good at making connections. We're supporting people and getting them access to things like housing, like employment, income supports, language training, learning. So we were connecting people to these systems. But we now got a situation where we know the housing is not functioning in terms of affordability. The labor market isn't giving people decent jobs. So to build off of what Herman was suggesting, I think the opportunity is to figure out how to work with organizations and the community in a way that recenters local inclusive economy lens. And that's something that West has been participating in already with Park and a lot of other players. And it's the Parkdale People's Economy is a great example of a way to think forward. It's not going to solve everything, but it's a way to think of, if our local economy was working better for people, what would we need to do with that? How would we weave those things together in terms of entrepreneurial stuff, local opportunities, co-ops, holding land in common, holding on to affordable things. And then it grows out from there. I think the agenda would grow out from there, and people would naturally say, well, if we're going to get further on this, we need investment from other institutions in our community, and here's what it needs to look like. Or we need policies that from the city and the province and the feds that would help us amplify what we're doing here, because it won't survive in isolation, but it begins to, I think, get people excited about the possibilities, and then it gives us more knowledge about what can a community be pushing for together. So that's what I see as the strongest building blocks that West has to move forward with.
Thank you, Rob. Sorry, folks, I could still hear and see everyone, but nobody could hear and see me. This is the exciting new feature that we have happening here. Thank you, Tim, for jumping in. We're going to keep you there in case that goes wrong again. I want to just circle back quite quickly because I'd like to move to Q&A. I can see that people have been dropping questions in the chat, and some of our speakers have been valiantly multitasking and answering some of them. But I do want to circle back quickly to Adriana and just see if there's anything you want to add to this conversation about what organizations can focus on for the future.
Yeah, I think I would definitely say it's important to think about our work as part of broader ecosystems, part of broader networks and coalitions. As was said, that our strength is the sum of our parts coming together. And it's really incredible when you see neighborhood goals versus organizational goals, and where you see collaboration of like shared mutual interest instead of kind of fighting over like who gets funded on which things or how is this going to be funded. I think it's that part that there's so much strength already in what West does in its collaboration, but more of that is important because again, as mentioning the challenges faced, I also think what's really important is to focus on organizational strengths. There's sometimes a desire, and I see this a lot as a funder, where everyone organization, oh, that organization got funded for this, so I want to do that and get funded. And part of it is like, organizations have years of knowledge and expertise, and that niche of, when I speak to organizations, what's your strategic superpower? What is the thing you know really well? And West has so many with that. And I think part of that is finding out. So, some of the work that I know really well that West does is around financial literacy and understanding that kind of relationship and the community-based research grounded on how you connect policy and practice. That is incredibly important and incredibly rich. And so finding what are the things that make the most sense going forward that you do really well, and then pushing yourself. So again, I don't think it's doing the same thing, maybe wearing different hats as you advance your superpowers, trying out different roles. How can you use your assets in different ways? But I think nonetheless, focusing on how you can push yourself to be better in those strengths. And then finally, I think it's both straddling, because the role that we do, there are needs and urgent needs of community that we work with, of straddling both upstream and downstream. So straddling the systemic issues and what can we do in preventative, preemptive, proactive kind of policy-oriented ways, but also how do we make sure there is dignity, community, relationships, love, caring at the heart of downstream services, because that's what, to me, the community service sector is more about the community than the services. And that's a really important thing to keep entrenched. So I think those are some key things I would just add, because those are key differentiators. Being place-based, having this ability of impact on watching kids grow, seniors, grandkids come to programming, seeing those neighborhoods, community. Place-based is something that's really crucial because we know that place is a central heart of change. And even though when people move, they still self-identify with key communities. And so I think those are also really powerful things to mobilize and use.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. I want to move into our Q&A, and I just want to note to our panelists, I see quite a lot of questions in the chat. If we can't get to all of them, we will follow up with you on them. And I also just want to note that I do want to allow our panelists, our participants, to ask the questions themselves, but I'm going to encourage them to keep it pretty brief. So I'd actually like to jump to Fran. I see she has a similar question to Keshia. So Fran, do you want to come off mute and ask your question? I can't see Fran here. Maybe she's decided she'd prefer not to. So I'll ask Keshia. You had something a little bit overlapping here, and I actually want to note too that we're not going to go around to all our guests here to answer them. So I'll ask guests to raise their hand if they feel like they can answer this nicely. Keshia, go ahead.
Hi everyone. Thank you for this discussion. I was wondering, especially I'm hearing the issue of affordability and housing and development just over and over again this weekend. And so I was wondering if your organizations work with the City of Toronto at all. And I'm specifically thinking about consultation or community consultation around zoning and development.
Anybody want to jump in on this? Yeah, Rob, go ahead.
I'll just say a few things. I know West definitely has been active in local redevelopments and trying to engage in community energy to see if some greater number of units and of affordability can be extracted from these plans. So that's been a piece of West's work. There's other community agencies who are active in that way. As a network, the network I work for, we are trying to push for like an affordable housing acquisitions plan with the city, and we are engaged with the city on lots of policy kind of co-creating. But I would say in the area of urban development, we're not very effectively connected or having an influence. We're finding it difficult to really shift the momentum of that that beast at the moment.
Thanks. And Adriana, I saw you put your hand up. Go ahead.
Sure. I would just add that there's different ways that we've been engaged on that, which I kind of show the different ends of the spectrum. You know, there's, and again, we as a community partner, we're kind of more behind the scenes in helping underpin the incredible work of workers who are like organizations that work on the front lines of social change. So there, we support kind of organizations like Acorn that do organizing and mobilizing and raising the issues and making sure, understanding that those that are most impacted are able to share their experience and truths and be part of policy solutions, understanding the nuance. So I think that's one part of that spectrum. Also in testing out models and figuring out what that would work, how that would work. And so we were exploring some of that with our own impact investing. So not just thinking of our granting dollars. And I think that is part of looking at all assets. So as a foundation, we have an endowment of dollars, and how can we, instead of in a way granting off the interest, how can we take some of those dollars and invest it in helping to, in the market and helping to maintain things around affordable housing. We also have helped support strategies around community benefits and other things around Section 37s when they used to be more prominent and all that. And basically, how do you tie in requirements and how do you make them legally binding is definitely a challenge, but how do you tie in requirements, whether they're of goodwill or if they're of like shared interest, to say, we're going to put so many affordable units in this building, or if you do this development, this is going to happen. You can see some of that mobilizing and organizing benefited in the neighborhood of Jane Finch, where they had an interest to have a community center placed on new land. The Metrolink said yes. Over the years, they said, well, actually, we didn't really mean yes, but community organizing came strong and said, through the community benefits movement and through a lot of local pressure to say these were promises and commitments made, and the government has kind of shifted that. So I think there's definite ways to participate on this issue, and it's across the spectrum. And what's really important is having shared lines of communication and reinforcing same messages. But there's also some underlying tensions and understanding the public-private partnership aspect of inclusionary zoning, or inclusionary zoning for how long, and the nuance of the who is affordable and who benefits is, I think, a key thing.
Thank you very much. Folks, I just want to give you a time check. We've got about 13 minutes left to ask Q&A. So do drop your questions into the chat so that we can keep that record in case our guests will agree to answer them offline. Devin, I'm going to ask you to take yourself off mute, ask your question briefly, and then we'll see who would like to answer it. Go ahead, Devin.
Yeah, my question has changed because I believe Rob answered it in the chat.
Okay.
But I do have a different question, and it's more focused on the organizational aspect of communities, which Adriana was just speaking to. I'm curious what resourcing is present within these communities, or like what resourcing is lacking for teaching people to self-organize and self-motivate and not necessarily rely on organizations as they are right now to push their political will forward.
Who'd like to jump in on that?
Well, I can say very briefly, and I'll is that, I think it's part of, how does one support that? Like, as an organization, what things happen led by an organization is very different than what things kind of emerge from the community supported by an organization. So where does the catalytic energy reside? And it's different when you see that catalytic energy turn from a program, and then it turns into like how many participants or things like that, and it changes it, versus catalytic energy of communities coming forward being like, this is something that's really important to us. West, can you help us move this forward? And the way that the creation story, I find, is really important on those kind of things, and equally where the leadership and agency resides, and how it's supported and funded.
That's interesting. Thank you, Adriana. I'd like to jump over to Emily and then Kelly. Emily, go ahead and take yourself off mute.
Oh, I think Rob has already answered
perfect.
the chat, and yeah, just want to leave for other questions.
Thanks so much, Emily, and thanks, Rob, for that double duty. So I'll go over to Kelly. Kelly, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today and letting us know more about your program. I guess I'm not sure who the question would go to, but Herman mentioned that there's entrepreneurship in the Scadding court. I guess this question would be towards Herman. But have you thought about, like you mentioned, funding or being scared that the funding could be withdrawn anytime? So with the program that you have for entrepreneurship, where you're investing in the youth and women as well, which is amazing, have you thought about, I don't know if it's like further expanding it, where the money that you're allocated to the service user, where you can make it as sort of like a business model, where the money is investing in the service users, where they don't have to pay it back, but you give the money and the resources for them to build their business to succeed. But at the same time, you have a clause where, of course, you have to come up with a term of how you define success. But when the business gets there, get to that point, you would get certain like incentive on money back, where the business would then reinvest it in the program. So that way you're not so dependent on the government funding or like other like less stable funders. I'm not sure if that makes any sense. I'm so sorry.
Let's see. Thanks, Kelly. Go ahead, Herman.
I understand, and that would be a very, very exciting model, Kelly. Thanks for suggesting that. The way we approached entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship opportunities was to give everyone all of the skills and access necessary to become super successful in their endeavor. And it's risky business in that, you know, there's a high percentage that don't, and that's not different than the experiences outside of when community centers like ours try to help people to start small business. You know, so we haven't actually looked at a model that you described, but it's interesting in that it would provide an opportunity for us to continue to do this work without government funding if everybody that became successful had a social responsibility to give back to the initiative. But it hasn't been something that we built into this, and we've allowed people to become successful and either stay and be successful with us or move on and you know, find a bricks and mortar and start their own business and be successful like any other successful business owner outside of us. So that's been the model. But thank you very much for sharing that with us. It's definitely something we should consider.
Yeah, thank you for answering my question, because I was thinking even if the business don't succeed, they can still give back in a way of like their experience of what they went through, what they think had gone wrong maybe, and like what can be improved on. Like experience sometimes, like failure is not always a bad thing, and experiences sometimes is more valuable than the actual like.
So sorry, Kelly, I'm just going to break in here because I'm really worried about time. But I would, you know, I think you've given Herman something to chew on here, and all of us something to consider. And I apologize for interrupting you. It's very rude on my part. I do want to jump over to Brant and then Charles. Brant, can you take yourself off mute?
Yeah, hi, thanks everybody. I really enjoyed this presentation. My question was, I was kind of gearing it towards Herman, because you'd mentioned working with young people and young people entering the labor force. I've noticed whenever we have young people at anywhere I've worked in a lot of like manufacturing type positions, having access to proper PPE, safety boots especially, seems to be a hurdle. I was wondering if you know of any organizations that helps pair young people with proper like work clothing and PPE, just having access to like, I guess, work jeans and things like that. Safety boots especially.
Yeah, there isn't like a program that I know of specifically that would do this. However, a lot of community serving organizations that have youth programming might have resources to help young people with things like work boots and work jeans and stuff. It's just normally just built right into anybody that's doing employment. So if they are in a vicinity like Scadding Community Center or something like that, they should just check in with us to see if that is something that we have the resource for at the time, and we can possibly help them. So anyone that you see like that, if they're from this neighborhood, please just put them in touch with us, and we'll do what we can to make sure that they have the proper safety equipment to go to work with 100%.
Thank you. And I'm seeing in the chat that Keshi is making the point that this extends to you know, what people often need. There's a lot of some programs to get people clothing for interviews, for example, that kind of thing, so that hurdle can be overcome. I want to jump over quite briefly to Charles. Go ahead and take yourself off mute, Charles.
Hi, thanks everyone. It was great. Rob, I was at the meeting that launched food banks in Ontario, so your comments about the role of food banks brought back a lot of memories. Quick question, future versus past. What all three have been talking around has been evident in this community for at least a decade. Where are we at? You know, we're now talking about the future. To what extent have the agencies been able to recognize it? Are they able to deal with it? Or are we talking about a whole different need for a whole different structure going forward?
Does anyone want to speak to that? I think, yeah, go ahead, Rob.
It's a hard-hitting question, but it's necessary.
I like it. It's top line.
I don't have a sense of what that whole different structure would look like. It's more of a process in my mind where communities need to, and all of the diverse parts and people in a community need to come together in a way as you are today, but more and more of this to come together and try to make sense of what's going on for us. What do we want that could be better? And how do help and organize ourselves, and what do we need out of our community agencies to help us do that. So it's more like a process to generate that agenda of what needs to change and what needs to look different. That's the way I see it, rather than figuring out the answer first.
Thank you, Rob. I want to jump over to Peter. Peter, go ahead and take yourself off mute. I'm not hearing you, Peter. Let's see.
Okay, hi everyone. I wasn't expecting you to call me so soon.
Sorry, Peter. I grabbed you.
Yeah, it's kind of still drafting out my question. Okay. My first question is this entrepreneurship, because I don't know if I should call it a question or my observation. I noticed that it's been so difficult for people of color to get access to grants. It's because there are so many factors and conditions that surround that. But when it comes to loans, it's easy because definitely loans you're paying back with interest. So I don't know, is there the right organization or department one can talk to regarding this program? And then that is question number one. And the second question is this: recently, an idea popped up on my mind about how to keep the dog packs, the packs where they walk dogs around, and because I've been noticing there's been feces and it's been left dirty. So if I want to talk to someone I'll share my ideas on how to keep it clean, what can be done. Who can I talk to? I don't know if I'm sorry, my question might not be related to what you do, but I just need any advice.
That's okay. It's on your mind, Peter. I can see it's on your mind. So what I'm going to flag here is that we can look into that second question for you. I think we want to maybe just, in the interest of time, especially focus on your first question, which had to do with grants and how people of color, especially, can gain access to grants. And I wonder if this is partly a question about systems navigation, sort of like how to find and secure and like deliver, tell them the right thing. Yeah, that kind of thing. So I'll look for anybody who wants to jump in here. Yeah, Adriana, go ahead.
So I'll answer that and then frame my last comment with that quickly. I'll cheat. I think part of that is system navigation is really hard. There's a lot of different programs that are out there, organizations that do different things, and finding out about that. And so again, place-based organizations are really critical because they help you navigate it and understand what things are available for what catchment. In the most general of that, microfinance is some of the things that are being tested are through Access Community Capital Fund, which is a small community organization, and Windmill, both who do microfinance loans. Those are more sometimes focused for people who want to like invest in further training or equipment or things like that. So kind of your individual career. But then there's also a lot of, well, not a lot, there's opportunities for entrepreneurship. You want to start your own business. And so I think there's equally, Alterna does some small microfinance loans. They also back again Access Community Capital Fund to start your own business. You see a lot of organizations might offer self-entrepreneurship program training. I think part of that is, and I would really caution, working with organizations that have an experience in working in entrepreneurship, community-based organizations, because as all you know, it's really hard. And then part of that is sometimes finding the challenges of, are you starting a business or are you misclassified as an independent contractor as being self-employed? And so again, there's solving the immediate issue, but also the broader kind of policy constraints of being like, is this about starting a business or kind of working as an independent contractor? The last thing I'll say, and just because I have a chance, is I think this is a really powerful moment. For many, this is the first time some people have interaction with income security supports. There's a level of understanding vulnerability in a way that I'd say middle class and a range of people who've perhaps been more comfortable in the past have never had to experience government funding. What do you mean I have to tell you every month about how much money I make? Like, these are new experiences for a lot of people. And I hope that it creates a stronger shared experience experience to help people say our social safety net is not working. And the way that we go about bringing human dignity through our financial instruments is not working. And perhaps that's a new shared mutual interest, not just for those that have been on the front lines of these issues, recognizing how it is demoralizing and ineffective for really vulnerable and low-income people. But hopefully this becomes something that kind of breaks through different income brackets now that more people have experienced it.
Thank you, Adriana. I love that last point about a bunch of people who've never had to deal with this kind of red tape suddenly realize and recognize how difficult and impenetrable it all actually is. Thank you very much. We've run out of time on this. If you didn't get a chance to have your question answered, we're going to collect some of them and send them to our speakers. I maybe didn't ask you guys about this before, but I hope that if you have a little bit of time, you might be able to lend us some answers. And I want to thank you so much for your time today. So much of what you said, I think, has fleshed out and animated what the panelists worked on yesterday when they started to generate some of the issues that are on their minds in this community. So I want to thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all, and good luck with the rest of your work. And I'm going to be really excited to see what you generate from this. It's really so valuable.
Excellent.
It was good to see you, Maureen. Have a wonderful day. We'll talk to you guys soon.
So much, all of you. Just appreciate your presence so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to invite West Neighborhood House, if you'd like to drop off the call at this point. We're going to move a bit more into internal deliberation processes. So I'd like to just start here, folks. And I'm just gonna, give me 1 second here. Yep. I want to start by asking, yeah, Herman, go ahead.